Tisuki Sawa. Gary counts down really slowly, which means I don't actually know when the camera's going to start. So that was a slightly slow reaction to the beginning of the show. But welcome. This is Tisuki Sawa. It's normally boiling in here, but it's especially boiling in here because it's very hot outside. I mean, what can I say? Oh, fuck. That's me speaking to myself. Ash Sarkar is back in the building. You've been away for a few weeks, haven't you?
I thought I was better than you, and then I came crawling back.
I knew you would, babe.
I could not find happiness on the outside. I went on holiday and then realised that what I missed the most was sweating spinal fluid in the Novara media shipping container.
Yeah. Just putting my phone on silent. Also joined by the fabulous Wendy Lou at Dell Systems on Twitter. Yeah. And writing in basically every single left publication, it's about 2 a week, about organising in the tech industry. Tell us a bit about yourself, Wendy. You used to work for Google.
I did.
One of the few people on the left who understand how to code, which is making you
oh my God,
in incredibly high demand.
Seen all of our nudes?
Well, I was an intern.
You don't have to be good at coding to see my nudes.
Okay, so yes, I worked at Google as an intern, a software engineering intern in 2013, and my background is definitely not traditional for the left. So I was a software developer basically my whole life, right? I started coding when I was 12.
Oh wow!
Spent a lot of time alone in my bedroom on the computer. Yeah.
How does that happen? I mean, I didn't mean for this show to be talking about how you became a coder at 12, but how does a 12-year-old become a coder? What goes on?
I don't know. I just started building websites and started writing code, started charging people to build code for them. I'd write code for them, and it was kind of cool. Yeah, it was a lot of fun. And it was a path that led naturally to just being a software developer, studying this in uni, getting a job at Google, working on a lot of open source projects. So I did a lot of that. And then when I graduated uni, I was supposed to go to Google full-time as a software engineer. They gave me an offer, and it's one of those things where, like, when Google gives you an offer, as a new grad out of school, you feel like you have to take it, right? Because for one, their offers are so good, right? And
how much money are we talking?
So they offered me a base salary of $100K.
Fucking hell!
And then about, I think it was like 30K in stock every year, but that was like just the first year. They would increase the number every year, and then it's like a 15K bonus. Yeah, so it's a lot of money for someone who's straight out of school, and it's absolutely ridiculous. And a lot of companies now, they offer more than that for new grads because salaries have been going up. But at the time, I was like, I should take this. I might as well, like, what else am I going to do with my life? Everyone's saying Google is a place you should work, like, you should be really proud of yourself. But I just, like, I hated my internship, right? Like, it was fun just to be in San Francisco to, like, hang out with fellow interns, and Google would pay for us to, like, go drinking all the time, basically, right? So it was fun, but the work itself was just really, really boring, really stultifying. And it was like, at a certain point, I was asking myself, like, is this really everything I worked so hard for? Like, I spent all this time writing code, because everyone was like, for one, I liked it, but everyone was saying, if you spend a lot of time writing code and you get really good at writing code, you'll get a great job. And this is where the money is these days, right? Like, you have to get into the tech industry. I was like, okay, yeah, there's a lot of money, but this is just really unsatisfying. And I don't want to spend my life in front of a computer writing this code for a system I don't care about all the time. So I had a bit of this, like, wake up moment, but it wasn't very radical or anything. It was just like, I just don't want to do this. And at the time, there was this huge startup trend going on, right? Like, the startup bubble was basically at its peak. And some of my friends and I decided to do a startup because we figured we could raise money pretty easily, and I could write the product, and then we could figure out how to sell it. We didn't know what we were doing, but we basically ended up starting a company that sold people's data. So you guys have heard of Cambridge Analytica. Yeah. It's not as bad as that, but there are a lot of companies that do very similar things. My company was kind of one of them. So we did that for about 3 years, and then eventually I just got sick of it. I was like, I can't do this anymore. Around the same time, I started reading books. I started reading, like, radical books, right, that I'd never, ever read before, because I was so convinced that
like
my whole
what? Go
life...
on, give us some of the...
Well, so I think the first like books that I read that, like, slowly pushed me over the edge were I read Post-Capitalism by Paul Mason, which at the time it was like the only thing I'd ever read that combined some form of, like, left politics with what I'd been thinking about in the tech world, because there's this huge strain of thought lately about universal basic income and automation, and the problem with the way the tech world approaches it is that a lot of these people, these tech pros, right, like I used to be,
Texas.
It was like, we're the first people who have ever thought of this. Like, we're the first people to have ever considered the problems of automation and basic income. We'll reinvent economics from scratch, not realizing that obviously there's a huge body of work. There's so many people who spend their lives thinking about this. So when I read Post-Capitalism, I remember thinking, oh, actually, I should probably learn some economics. And I should probably learn some Marx. I had never read any Marx ever in my life. So I started reading books. I bought books from Verso, I think, when they had the sale, and I was like, okay, I'll try some of these books. I don't know what they're like. I read the Jacobin Verso series, so Four Futures is one of those books, and just the more I read, the more I realized that there was this like theoretical framework that I had never heard of, right? Ever. Just no one had ever told me in any like computer science or math classes that I should understand what Marxism was, or just philosophy or anything. And so I realized I was missing out a lot. So I spent
it's not a requisite of getting a job at Google.
No. It's almost
the Communist Manifesto.
It's almost like an exclusion. Like if you know too much about the left, you can't actually work at a lot of these companies because you'll just not want to, right? Like why would you want to work at something like this shitty corporate job if you understand how politics works and you understand what you should be doing with your life? So yeah, I mean, last year for me, I just read a ton of books, read a ton of like left publications, started subscribing to Novara Media, right, Jacobin, that sort of thing.
The radicalization strategy is working, my friend.
We
need to radicalize more tech workers.
Yes.
But
indeed.
if we radicalize you and you're a tech worker for at least a year, please keep your 100k job and go to support.novaramedia.com, because a new media does not come for free. To be honest, some of it does, but that's the problem. That's why it's quite unsustainable. So
As the
please,
great Dolly Parton says, it costs a lot of money to look this cheap. So
that's a good phrase. I like that.
Yeah, a great phrase.
This is the perspective we're going to be drawing upon when we talk later in the show about tech organizing in Silicon Valley and even abolishing Silicon Valley. We're going to talk about what that means. First, to start off the show, Ash.
So something really wound me up last week.
Go on.
And the thing that really wound me up was hearing on Friday that on Thursday night, George the Poet, a spoken word artist and rapper and educator, all-round incredible artist and thinker. So if you're not familiar with his work, go check it out immediately, was stopped and searched quite aggressively outside his parents' house after performing a sold-out show. So he filmed some of this footage. Do we have that available to us, Gary?
Yeah, we can get the Insta up.
Just come back from my show, my successful headline show, and it's got a nice little welcome from...
Oh, this is nuts.
Okay, why does he have his handcuff? Where's he handcuffed?
Outside my parents' house.
Has anyone got photographic ID for the gentleman so we can be on our way?
In front of all my neighbours. Wikipedia me. Google me. Yeah, photographic ID.
Has anyone got photographic ID?
You're asking for that now?
What is that? Like what?
A photograph.
They're asking for ID now?
So he posted that footage up on his Instagram, and this was what the caption said. I'm going to try and condense it because it's fairly long. Last night, after a beautiful sold-out show, I was chilling outside my parents' house when police rolled up in that big van asking questions about my car. I answered and verified. They then told me to move my hand from my waistband. Out of nowhere, they cuffed me and searched my car for weapons. After the car itself was the first issue. So first they said, the problem is your car. Next, we're searching it for weapons. They put me in the van and did a strip search. They then took 20 minutes to write my search slip, being rude to my parents and neighbours the whole time. This week, I've done talks on diversity at Cambridge and Cardiff. Police didn't get a mention once, because as a grown man, I'm sick of talking about them. They will never change. They don't deserve my energy. And talks about to be cuffed and dragged around in front of my parents while they make up lies about me being aggressive and having weapons. It's a reminder we don't fight on our own terms, we fight on theirs. To all my young boys who are locked in conflict with each other, please wake up and realise who your real enemies are. I don't like sharing images of me being handled like a second-class citizen by public servants whose salaries we pay taxes for. This is not how I see myself. It's not what I invite into my life. But these images should be an education for anyone who doesn't understand the toxic energies that are quietly spread throughout our community by state actors. Imagine if my nephews woke up and saw their big famous uncle getting handled like this. What seeds would that sow in them? Writing this post was boring. I've got better things to do. Sorry to anyone who was woken up by the noise. So
it's a very powerful statement.
It was really powerful. Like I said, like an incredible mind, an incredible thinker. So why don't you tell me, Michael, about how the police's behaviour in terms of stop and search, how coherent has it been with wider government policy, and what's Labour's response to this looking like?
Wow, I really didn't know you were going to ask me that question.
Oh shit, sorry.
But I can attempt an answer. I think you'd probably answer it better than I would.
Yeah, no, just every so often I have to, throw you a little crumb.
All right. Thanks, babe. What was the question? So how does this relate to
stop and search.
Stop and search. So this is currently in the news more. I know this in relation to Sadiq Khan. So Sadiq Khan ran in 2015 saying he'd do whatever was in his power to reduce stop and search. There's been a lot of pressure on him since the rise in knife crime recently, quite significant rise in knife crime, which has caused him to do a U-turn, and he said he's now committed to significantly increasing stop and search in the face of that pressure. I'm not sure if this particular stop and search would be a result of that change in policy. I don't know how quickly these policies feed through, or if this is something that's been consistently going on for the last few years. Am I supposed to throw back the question at you, Ash?
Yeah, you
that's
can.
That's what we're doing now. I mean, this incident got famous because he's famous. How often is this kind of thing? How often are people getting strip searched in the street for having done absolutely nothing wrong, for just being in a car?
I mean, so I guess the first thing to say is that since 2010, 2011, where stop and searches were really at their peak, there was a concerted government effort to reduce the number of stop and searches, because there was a great deal of concern over how unevenly they were being sort of distributed in terms of stop and searches of different communities. However, while there was a quite speedy decline in the numbers of stop and searches, that decline wasn't as speedy for each ethnic group. So the sharpest and quickest fall in terms of people being stop and search was for white people, and surprisingly the slowest fall was for people of colour.
To be honest, you say that sounds surprising to me, because I'd have thought sort of, if the reason the police are ramping this down is because they're getting accused of racism, then they should be more hesitant to stop and search black people if what they're worried about is the perception of it being unequally applied. Well, I mean, obviously the stats don't lie. This is just me saying that. Yeah. That's, I actually find that surprising. It's
counterintuitive, but I guess, and not to sound reductive, the police are really fucking racist, and it is written through the DNA of, in particular, the Metropolitan Police. So it doesn't surprise me at all that if you're being told get the numbers down, but you have been taught from the day you entered Police Academy, not the film, great film, but from the day you entered the forces, that the way in which you reduce crime, and you don't, we'll get into this in a little bit about just how poor stop and search is as a method of crime reduction, is that you've been told that you have to hit these communities really hard, and that's the only way to keep communities safe, then your overall change in policing won't actually be that kind of foundational overhaul that is sorely needed. It would be kind of, edging around the periphery on that.
I'm kind of going to throw back the question that you asked me, because I know that you'll give a better answer. So, is it in any way reasonable that Sadiq Khan responded to pressure to say we will start increasing stop and search? So, I mean, I think his line is, I wanted to decrease it, but basically the spike in knife crime has meant we will have to start bringing it back, even if in a targeted way. It's sort of difficult to know precisely what that means. I think Labour's official position is therefore stop and search, so long as it's evidence-based. I don't know if that's satisfactory to you.
So what's interesting when you look at the data is that, yes, while we've seen a fall in number of stop and searches, fall in policing numbers, we've seen this increase in some types of violent crime. It's interesting what gets looped into the moral panic and what gets excluded. So I had a little look during the kind of knife crime media frenzy peak a couple of months ago, and noticed that there were 3 reported stabbings in, I think, a single evening, but only one of them got picked up, where the victim was a young black man. The others weren't mentioned. One of them was stabbing in a betting shop. So it's interesting how one type of knife crime gets pulled into a discussion about the policing of public space, and other forms of knife crime don't. So it depends on who the assailant is, who the victim is. Similarly, bladed weapons are used in half of all intimate partner murders, and yet that doesn't feed into our sense of like what knife crime is. So that's the first thing to say, is that this spike in violent crime overall isn't just about essentially like working class people of colour, except that's how we choose to understand it. The second thing is that actually there is a wealth of data on how effective stop and search is, and it shows that it is not effective at all. It has little to no effect on reducing violent crime. So this is from the Metropolitan Police's own data from a 10-year study that shows that while increased stop and search was effective in reducing non-violent drug offences, the impact on violent crime was absolutely negligible. A 10% increase in stop and search could only expect to yield a 0.1% decrease in violent crime. And that's, you know, really a blip, and it's so volatile as to whether or not you're going to get that 0.1% decrease, is that the study's author said that basically has no effect whatsoever. And so another way in which we can see that stop and search is completely ineffective when it comes to being a useful way of crime prevention is that even though stop and search use overall has fallen since 2010, 2011, we actually haven't seen a fall in the arrest rate. So that's remained fairly consistent. I think we should have a little table for that coming up. Do we have a little table for that? Doesn't matter. And so then
you'll have to Google it.
Yeah, Google it, all right? Take my word for it. I've got a really trustworthy, if sweaty face. And then we have to start asking ourselves questions about just how uneven the racialized application of stop and search is. Because 5 people out of every 1,000 are likely to be stop and search. For black people, it's 29 people out of every 1,000 black people. So that's an astonishing racialized outcome there. And then we have to ask ourselves, like, okay, well, is it just because, as lots of our friends in the right-wing media would suggest, that, black people are just, overrepresented when it comes to the kinds of crimes that are looking to be tackled? Well, let's have a little look at non-violent drug offences. 43% of searches that were then subsequently studied were drug-related searches, and black people are less likely to have illegal substances found on them than white people by a significant margin. So I think Release have the statistics for that. So 5.8% black people use drugs compared to 10.5% of white people, which is why I tend to hang out with white people. But they are 6 times more likely to be stopped and searched for drugs. The smell of cannabis was given as a reason for random stop and searches for 23% of all searches. Wow. And it's, incredibly ineffective as a model of policing. So yeah, this idea that it's going to be great for reducing violent offences, not true. This idea that it's, tackling hardened drug users on our streets, not true. And this idea that it can be applied in any way racially evenly, not true.
Yeah. Put yourself in Sadiq Khan's shoes. Tiny shoes. Has he got tiny shoes? I suppose he's a small man.
He's a small man.
He's got an election campaign coming up.
Mm-hmm.
He's feeling under pressure because knife crime is going up under his watch. He's being called complacent from many angles.
Mm-hmm.
There were a few own goals. I think it took him quite a while to meet some of the parents of the victims of knife crime. What should he do to put himself on the front foot without sort of adopting these kind of what you're describing as reactionary measures?
So here's the thing, is that you can please the right-wing press or you can be effective and pick what your priority is. What's effective and what we know is effective is a public health-driven model of violence reduction, in which you increase the role for social services, for early intervention, when you think about containment strategies rather than punishment strategies. And then you also have a really good look at other factors which are driving increases in violent crime. So the closure of youth centres, the fact that schools in London in particular are overcrowded, it's easy to get lost in the system. An overburdened care service as well. All these things contribute to an uptick in violence. If you want to be effective, address those things. If you want to please, disgusted in Tunbridge Wells and no one else who's never been anywhere near Tower Hamlets, increase stop and searches.
Yep. It's hard to disagree with that. Do you disagree? It'd be great if you came in here with sort of like really controversial disagreement with what Ash just said. Actually, I'm really in favour of stop and search.
No, I don't disagree, and I think just one way to tie it into the tech aspect is that what we're seeing is that in the US especially, there's been this rise of predictive policing, where basically you have these tech companies
like Minority Report.
Yeah, kind of, right? They're like selling these algorithms to police
get
departments.
Samantha Morton out the paddling pool. I love that film.
It's like this way of using the data, right, to say like you should only stop and search in this neighborhood because this is where they're more likely to commit crimes. This is where they're more likely to need to be stopped and searched. And of course, because you're working with data, that data is going to be inherently racist, right? It's going to be inherently biased because of all this institutional structural bias. But because it's just, an algorithm, it's neutral, it's like a really effective shield that these police departments can use to kind of abdicate responsibility by saying it's not us, right? It's the algorithm.
Yeah. So the algorithm told me to stop and search this guy in a black working class neighborhood.
Exactly. And so there's nothing wrong with the way we're doing things. It's just technology, and technology is neutral. Yeah.
There was something that I read about Taser developing a database which could predict criminal movements, which just sounds like the most dystopian thing I'd ever heard in my life.
It's really terrifying. Yeah.
Why was Samantha Morton in the paddling pool?
So
it was her brain that processed this machine. Was it?
In what, for Taser or in Minority Report?
In Minority Report. I think the predictions came from her brain.
Yeah, so she was in the paddling pool with the two others, right? And so she's floating around like this, and then she'll be like she'd have a little vision, and then...
But it's clearly just going to come from a computer.
And then the ball would come out.
Oh, yeah.
But you said it's like Minority Report, and I was like, oh my God, that sounds awful.
No, it is. I'm just surprised that movie was made in, what was it, the early noughties, late 90s. And they couldn't understand that those kind of predictions would be made by a computer, not by a woman floating in a paddling pool. I mean, I just find that strange. Because
then Tom Cruise, all he would have to do is leng the computer, and you don't have a...
Does he fall in love with Samantha Morton?
No, he doesn't fall in love with Samantha Morton. He takes her out the paddling pool, though.
And how many people die as a result? What would you do? An ethical conundrum. Oh my God. I can't remember the film. Did it turn out to be bad, or was it kind of cool?
I never actually watched it, but I have
stopping crimes before they get committed.
I have a funny story about Minority Report, and I hope the person who's involved in the story doesn't watch this. It's a little embarrassing. But my co-founder for my startup, he once pitched to an investor that our startup would basically be like the scene in the Minority Report when this guy's like walking past some sort of billboard in the mall, and it changes to reflect who he is and what he likes, and that's how he pitched the startup.
Micro-targeting.
Yeah. And the investor was like, "Oh, that's great. It's cool. I like it." Right? And there's something kind of funny about the way what we now think is dystopian is like this wonderful utopia for a lot of people in the tech industry. That's why we have to abolish Silicon Valley. We'll talk about that later.
I mean, I think we should loop back on this conversation, because I think it actually has like as you were saying, it's got a real what we think of as kind of quite distant conversations about tech actually affects how we live in our communities every single day. So thinking about algorithmic racism, the idea that we might have institutional racism without racist individuals anymore is something which I find quite terrifying. But I think something that we should consider is inherent to the production of space, of urban space in particular. These things which we think of as dystopian are actually someone else's utopia. So coming back to Stop and Search, when I was tweeting about George the Poet Stop and Search last week, Dan Hancock's a friend of the show, amazing grime writer, tweeted back by saying that, well, at the height of grime, so maybe it was like 2004 or something, Jammer, who is part of Boy Better Know, and also just the nicest person on the planet, was doing a show in Bethnal Green, Rich Mix, and was really aggressively stopped and searched on the street in front of everyone. And so when we think about that policing of the street as a distinctly new Labour phenomenon, and also we think of like Rich Mix as a kind of like new Labour cultural institution, and then this is how like artists of colour are treated, is that, well, that method of securitization, CCTV everywhere, stops and search everywhere, ASBO policing, so the idea that you are criminalizing once non-criminal forms of behavior, that's New Labour's utopia. That's a working class black man's dystopia. So you're always on that really fine edge.
Ash, I've got a segue.
Yeah.
Samantha Morton in the paddling pool could predict future crimes. The American political establishment could not predict the victory of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez in last Tuesday's primaries in a particular district of New York. I can't remember what it's called, NY14 or something.
Smooth as ice.
Yeah, that's what I thought. If you want more of those segues, please go to www.novaramedia.com/Novara
No,
Media.
support.novaramedia.com.
Thank you, Ash. Go to that one, support.novaramedia.com, because new media can not for much longer come for free.
Oh my god.
Wow.
I'm getting more and more desperate every week.
It's very hot in this office.
It's really fucking hot in this
You could get like an air
I think the
We've become increasingly sweaty and weird, so let's just commit to the segue.
I think the aircon will be quite. I think about 3 years until the
That's
aircon.
a second tier
in
purchase.
the master plan,
right?
we get aircon
That's
in
a
3 years'
second tier
time.
purchase.
I think that's going to be in about 6 months' time. I'm going to get that stuff that makes your forehead less shiny.
Oh yeah. Do you want blotting paper? Because that, like, Rihanna's bringing back blotting paper for all of us with Fenty Beauty, whereas actually I think you're thinking about.
I'm thinking of
translucent
powder. Yeah, I'm just thinking of blusher. No.
No. Blusher's not what you want on your forehead. You want translucent powder.
Yeah, but it's got a
Translucent
name.
setting powder.
Foundation. I'm not going to wipe my forehead with kitchen roll on fucking YouTube. You just have to. I'd prefer to be shiny.
Can we move on to New York?
Ocasio-Cortez.
Thank you.
Tell us. I've got distracted by
Your own
perspiration,
sweatiness.
by my own perspiration. So Wendy, please tell us about
Can you also show us your
Alexandria
t-shirt?
Ocasio-Cortez and show us your t-shirt.
So I was going to wear this t-shirt, but it's a little hot in this office, so I can't. But yes, I am technically a Democratic Socialist of America member. I'm a paper member because obviously I don't live in the US, I live here. But I'm registered to the San Francisco chapter, where...
Speaking of paper... Sorry, go on.
So I'm not actually American, but I guess I'm the closest thing to an American you guys have right now. So
you're Canadian?
I'm Canadian.
I was thinking today. I was like, actually.
Yeah. No, but I follow American politics. I've lived in the U.S. for a bit, and I'm really excited by Ocasio-Cortez's victory. And I think what it really speaks to is the fact that there is an appetite for socialist politics in the U.S. And what we're seeing there is kind of similar to what we saw here with Jeremy Corbyn. Right, where you have a base, like the Democratic base is actually much further left than the establishment, and so they were hungry for a candidate who actually spoke to their interests. Versus the same thing here, where you so many people supported Jeremy Corbyn, the establishment did not think he could become leader. Right, they were like, he's appealing to a very small minority of people, but that wasn't true. They just couldn't see it, and it seems like there are a lot of parallels there as well. The problem is that the Democratic Party is much more entrenched, much more ossified than the Labour Party, and the way that these things work and the amount of money in the Democratic political machine, just the amount of money in American politics in general is way, way worse than it is here. And so there's a long road ahead, but at the same time, the fact that she actually managed to beat this incumbent who, it seems like, was quite powerful in the party machine. Not powerful in the sense that he got people to vote for him. People didn't necessarily care, right? But he was powerful in the sense that, he was pulling the strings for a lot of things. He could get the right people nominated, and he was kind of resting on his laurels. He raised so much money. He raised, I forget how much, just like
10 times more than her.
10 times more than she did. Just incredible. And for her, she won partly because of her ground game. Right, they were knocking on doors all the time, but partly because she had policies that actually appealed to people.
So let's talk about some of those policies. What were they?
Yeah, so she ran on just a classic Democratic Socialist America platform, right? Medicare for all, abolishing ICE, I believe, was something she came out with soon after, and just I guess very very similar to what Bernie Sanders was proposing. There are some differences, but the point was everything she was proposing was so far left of what the Democratic establishment was proposing. So very very similar to Jeremy Corbyn running on an anti-austerity platform, whereas all the other leadership candidates in 2015 were like, austerity is okay. We'll do a little bit less austerity this time, but it's still good overall. And they just didn't really differentiate themselves from each other. So for her, it was just someone so new, so fresh, and she's so young. She's 28, and she was actually a member of Democratic Socialists of America, which is just incredible. I mean, Bernie wasn't even a member of DSA. So
has he joined yet?
I don't think so.
Come on, Bernie, hurry up.
I mean, he has some policies that aren't so great. He hasn't really been good on the whole abolishing ICE thing. It's unfortunate.
Has he not? I suppose he's going for a presidential run and he doesn't think it's a popular policy.
Let's talk about this Abolish ICE idea, because it seems to have developed a great deal of public interest relatively quickly. It's got, and I think that's because the sheer brutality of the US border regime, it makes it less and less possible to articulate a kind of triangulation of like little bit border control. Like, you know, you have to go the whole hog in terms of arguing against a draconian border regime, because you can't talk about moderating that kind of insurgent fascist force, really. But what I found interesting about the way in which, you know, because there has been a blowback against Ocasio-Cortez, both from the right-wing establishment and then also the right of the Democratic Party itself. And what was interesting to me is that they were saying that she risks alienating this kind of imaginary white voter who, you know, seems to live everywhere and nowhere, by pursuing such a radical anti-racist cause.
Before you answer that question, the heat has made me lose all sense of organising the show, and I feel like there's some terms I might need to introduce to the audience. So ICE is Immigration and Customs Enforcement. They are currently in the public consciousness in America, obviously because of Trump's policy of separating migrant children from their parents when they come over the border undocumented. The reason that's happening is because Trump has adopted a zero tolerance policy to undocumented migration, whereby people who are found to have crossed the border without documentation are treated as criminals within the criminal justice system straight away, which means they go to federal prison to await trial, I suppose. And when they go to federal prison, as is American law, their kids get taken away from them, and they end up the kids get warehoused in cages on the border. And as videos came out of these kids sort of crying, this has become a huge political, rightly, a huge political scandal in the United States. And Ocasio Cortez, who, as we've just been saying, ran and beat, his name was Joe Crowley. So he was the number 4 Democrat in the House of Congress. So he looked like he was going to be leader of the House in the future. It's a lot like when in 2014, it was Eric Cantor, who was the Republican leader of the House, got beat by a Tea Party candidate. So we can talk about that relationship in a moment. Sorry, after those intros, go on to, so we were talking about Ocasio-Cortez has said she would abolish ICE. This was one of her policies to mobilize her base. We just showed a tweet up there, which showed an American political scientist with about 300k Twitter followers. I hadn't heard of the guy, but that's his credentials. Political scientist, 300k Twitter followers. He'd written a book. He's saying that this slogan, abolish ICE, is going to alienate the Democrats from most people in the United States, and it's going to help re-elect Trump in 2020. So basically, it's a losing message for the Democrats.
I mean, what do you make of that?
I mean, I think what he's saying is bullshit, frankly, right? And it just speaks to the failure of imagination of, just mainstream politics in the U.S., everywhere, really, but especially in the U.S. And I think part of the reason I got drawn to radical politics in the first place is because, especially throughout 2016 and early 2017, right after Trump got elected, I felt like everything I was reading that came from, just like liberal centrist viewpoints, it just felt like it didn't make any sense, right? And that there just was no theoretical grounding in which any of this could be explained. And they were just grasping at straws. And I mean, I think that example speaks to it, right? This guy seems to think that abolishing ICE is this incredibly radical, alienating position that no one would ever support. ICE was only founded, I think, less than like 2 decades ago, right? Yeah. I think 2003.
It was after 2001. After 9/11 by George Bush.
For some reason, like, this guy can't imagine a world where voters would want to not have ICE as something that exists. And I think what he's maybe missing is the fact that not everyone thinks like him. Not everyone has been in the political establishment for so long that, their minds are just like stuck firmly in this one way of thinking. I think a lot of people haven't had a lot of time to think about politics and understand how it shapes their lives, how it shapes the world that they live in. And it feels like recently, we're seeing this this wave of politicization as people start to realize that things like ICE, when they see a video of children being kept in cages, they look at that, and some of them are, maybe they thought the world was fine. They thought that the U.S. was mostly fine. Like, they're a rich country. Things are a little bit bad, but it's not too bad. Then they look at that, and then that just kind of hits them in the face, and they realize, actually the country that we're living in is founded on this just incredibly immoral sort of thing happening all the time. Maybe there's something I can do about it. And just as an example, in the Democratic Socialists of America San Francisco chapter, they have this intro to socialism thing every once in a while. And yesterday they had one where they were expecting maybe 5 to 10 members. There are 70 people there. And it feels like that's something that, as a result of maybe the whole Abolish ICE campaign, because DSASF was quite active in that and did some marches, and maybe also because of Ocasio-Cortez, people are starting to realize that there are alternatives to this really just like theoretically flawed and morally bankrupt, like liberal political trajectory.
And you know who really needs to hear this? The old left in the UK, because this is a political conflict I find myself bashing my head up against on pretty much a weekly basis, which is there is an idea amongst lots of people on the left that anti-racism in of itself will always be alienating to a white working class electorate who you have to, encourage to vote for you. And that if you present a socialist policy platform, it will somehow magically be anti-racist and move people in that direction, whereas anti-racism on its own anti-racism, if it's too prominent, can alienate people from a socialist cause. Whereas I think what you're suggesting here is that that's actually a way in for people into the DSA, and I think that's something that's worth pointing out. I think another thing that's worth pointing out, and again, this is something which I think some aspects of the Labour movement, and in particular this kind of revived Labour left could learn from as well, is that I think that there is some really strong socialist messaging around dismantling border regimes. So the expansion of immigration detention and deportation that's been outlined by Trump will require $1.2 billion, and that will be divvied out to private contractors like Core Civic, like Geo Group. All of these sound like, if we're kind of coming back to sci-fi dystopias, it sounds like the kind of evil corporation that has to be, taken down. And Geo Group in particular were very generous donors to Trump-aligned super PACs, like during his election. So, this goes hand in hand with the corruption of American politics by big money. This is no way, draining the swamp, cleaning up politics. Like, this is just another avenue for corrupt money. While the structures of party funding are significantly different in the UK, I think we can also look at G4S, we can look at Sarkar as vested interests, which are deeply, deeply corrupt as well. What's interesting to me is that if you look at coming back to the stop and search issue, if you look at organisations like Only Connect, I think, which is a kind of a gang exiting strategy, which seems to do nothing apart from have a website of, people doing, culturally diverse things, and they just swallow up a load of money from the government, is that the person at the head of that is Danny Kruger, who used to work for David Cameron, big society guy. Oh, so,
it's pretty big.
He made the case for, gutting public services, now swallowing up a ton of public money for this completely toothless gang exiting strategy thing. And then if you look at who's involved with, say, Safer London, I think it's someone from an organisation like Serco. It might not be Serco itself, but someone like Serco. So you do have this kind of constellation of corrupt financial interests and an interest in maintaining and expanding racist state apparatus here in the UK as well. And I think that the left generally, and I'm not just talking about the Labour left, I'm also talking about an anti-racist left, which I think sometimes has set its horizons too narrow or too broadly abstract to have any traction. This is the kind of thing that we really need to start gunning for.
I think, to be fair to the old left, I mean, it's too early to say whether Abolish ICE will be a successful electoral message. It's only been tried out in one district in New York, and we really don't know. I mean, what is clear is that the Republicans are trying very hard to paint this as the left fighting for no borders, which I think would be very unpopular policy to run on in the presidential elections in 2020.
Stand on a no borders platform, but you start chipping away.
Yeah. You start moving, shifting the Overton window, right, until you get there. Well,
I think people want a humane. People want a humane immigration system, but they don't want to get rid of the immigration system. Is what I would. Yeah. Hopefully, maybe one day. But all I'm saying is I don't think this disproves the idea that saying no borders can't win elections, because it won. Well, she wasn't saying no borders anyway.
No, and that's the thing, is that I think
some people
that
in DSA are.
I think that it's misrepresentative, and I think that it is. I think that the right would make a miscalculation of hitting back at the abolish ICE messaging as see they want to open up the borders, whereas actually those images of crying children at the border have a great deal of resonance for most people. Like, you have to be, and there are a ton of hardened racists in the United States, like I'm not naive about that, but I think that it would be a misstep for them to fight on that terrain in that way.
I think what's quite possible is the people that will decide the next election don't care about ICE. So there's been some interesting, well, I mean, you don't even need a study to show that Trump won the election because of certain voters in the American Rust Belt, which is Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin. Is there one more? No, I think it's those three, isn't it? And the districts that voted heavily for Trump were in some cases multicultural. They'd often voted for Obama twice and then moved to Trump. So they weren't voting out of white supremacy. They often tolerated white supremacy, but they were voting because someone was saying they would challenge the current trade system, basically, which had gutted their county of jobs. So, I mean, I don't think any message about ICE is really going to swing the election in that region. I think what Ocasio-Cortez has done quite well is to say the Democrats need to move beyond this idea where there's either class or identity issues. I mean, obviously Hillary Clinton tried to win an election just on identity issues. She was saying America is better than this. Her slogan was "I'm with her." And she didn't mention economic inequality at all. I just want to read one really good, like amazing quote from Ocasio-Cortez. So she says, this is quoted in an Intercept article, "At the end of the day, I'm a candidate that doesn't take corporate money, that champions Medicare for all, a federal jobs guarantee, the abolishment of ICE, and a Green New Deal. But I approach those issues with the lenses of the community that I live in. And that's not as easy to say as identity politics." Which I think is nice.
And also, that's the thing, is that, like, when it comes down to these discussions of identity politics, and I think all of us in some way get pulled into this by nature of who we are, is that you get pulled into defending a set of politics that you have very, very deep critiques of, because you know that the critiques that it's being met with aren't the ones that you hold. It's basically saying we preferred it when people of colour, when women, when queer people, when disabled people remained silent about that which affected their ability to participate wholeheartedly in movements of solidarity. Right, and then it's hard to come through with that critique and to complicate the conversation and to add nuance. And that's why I like, Ocasio-Cortez so much, is because she is doing that.
She's amazing. And I mean, going back to the abolishing ICE thing, I think it's a mistake to think about it solely in terms of whether it'll win an election, right? And because there's a much broader challenge here, and the point of saying things like that is to politicize people, is to get people to realize that, the things that that their country is doing are the results of political actions, and that they could have an effect. And I think it's already starting to happen, right? Even Fox News has the potential to radicalize some people who watch it, because what I saw an image where Fox News really just stated Ocasio-Cortez's platform. They didn't.
She retweeted it and said, great.
Yeah. And it was like, it's almost an advertisement for her. And maybe some of Fox News's viewers will see that and be like, maybe I should look into this more. Why is Medicare for All such a bad thing? Right?
I also think, like, in terms of political media, because this is something that I'm quite interested in, is like, when is that moment of tipping over where they've told you to hate someone so much that you can't help but love them? Is that I think that there's often a grave miscalculation in a presumed passivity of your audience. I think people are only as dumb as you treat them, and I think it's very dangerous to assume that people will be dumb forever, is the first thing. And I think the second thing is, coming back on normalising a politics of abolish ICE. Well, before Windrush, if you told me in 2 weeks' time the hostile environment will be, critically discredited to the point where I think, you could have...
It's very similar to the hostile environment, this, because it's sort of a particular inhumane aspect of migration policy.
Which leads to a much wider conversation about what an immigration system looks like. Is that I think Labour can stand and win on dismantle the hostile environment platform, which they will be doing. So I think that there's great value in having candidates like Ocasio-Cortez or figures like David Lammy and Diane Abbott popularising these ideas, and then also in activists who do come from that no borders tradition, who are doing that really disruptive work, which it, you know, by its very nature has to be small scale. I think that all these things have a place in a healthy leftist ecology.
I think all coming from slightly different places. We are in favour of abolishing ICE. We're going to speak in a moment as to whether we are in favour of abolishing Silicon Valley.
That's good.
First, surprise, surprise, I think Ocasio-Cortez's victory can teach us a lesson about how the Labour Party should organise its rules. So Ocasio-Cortez's campaign was possible because the American system allows people to challenge incumbents from the outside based on a positive campaign. Ocasio-Cortez could, I think, collect a certain amount of signatures, and that means she can challenge Joe Crowley was his name. Was it Joe Crowley? Yeah. He's so forgettable, this guy. He's so forgettable. She could challenge him in a head-to-head contest. They didn't have to first deselect Joe Crowley. So they didn't have to have a divisive campaign, which was, is Joe Crowley good? Is Joe Crowley bad? Which is what we'd currently have to have in the Labour Party before someone inspirational like Ocasio-Cortez could sort of step up. And if we want to revitalise the Labour Party, this is exactly what we have to do. We have to allow inspiring outsider candidates, people engaged in their communities with sort of the ideas that are up and coming in Britain right now. Because obviously Ocasio-Cortez wouldn't have won 10 years ago, but that's because socialism is now on the up. And if your party cannot incorporate ideologies which are on the up, then you're not going to be adaptable enough to win elections. We saw, and this isn't just good for socialists actually, Ocasio-Cortez, it's going to be good for the Democratic Party. So the Republican Party was able to flip both houses under Obama's presidency, even though journalists, academics quite rightly were saying there should be an inbuilt Democratic majority in America right now. And that's because it's soon to become a majority-minority nation. The Republicans are only really capable of appealing to mainly white men. I mean, Trump also won white women, but by a smaller margin. If you look at the demographics of America, Republicans should not win. The reason they could win is they had an incredibly mobilized and passionate base who were inspired by the Tea Party. I mean, obviously, I don't agree with their politics. We don't agree with their politics, but they did rejuvenate the Republican Party. And the Democratic Party would be stupid to try and suppress the movement which we are seeing around Ocasio-Cortez. And the Labour Party would be stupid to not allow inspirational community candidates to stand against people like Neil Coyle, to stand against people like Chris Leslie. Think of the passionate, inspiring, articulate people that live in Bermondsey and Southwark.
Can we keep Mike Gapes though? Just because if we get rid of him, I will have no more mirth, laughter, joy in doing these shows anymore.
Ash, you know what? When we get these reforms, when inspiring community candidates can stand against incumbents who represent the politics of the past,
I will be campaigning for Mike Gapes.
You can campaign for Mike Gapes, but ultimately the people are going to decide. That's the beauty of it. The people are going to decide.
I hate democracy.
I loved it.
All right. Mandatory reselection.
No, but it's actually better than that, because I agree. When you say this is a good argument for mandatory reselection, quite rightly sort of centrists say, but it wasn't just party members that could vote for Ocasio-Cortez. She had to do an outward-facing campaign, which I think is right.
Yeah.
I think if you can only inspire party members, then maybe you're not that good.
Yeah.
So I feel like if the baseline to win is you have to inspire more people in that constituency than the incumbent, that's a good challenge to set yourself. And I think that's the policy we should have.
But also, like, I think that Ocasio-Cortez shows something which is much harder to sort of reduce to certain institutional arrangements within a party political structure. And it's a mood, it's emotional affect, it's a politics of hope, a politics of joy. But also, if you don't come from a posh, moneyed background, and if you are also a woman, and to add to that you're a woman of colour, you go through your life feeling like a complete fraud. And I know I do every single day of my life. I think whatever it is I'm doing, I am not qualified to do this. I'm waiting for an adult to just sort of like come in and take the reins and like tell me what to do. And at the same time, I know that when people are kind of trying to step in, that like I have a gut feeling that's telling me that what I was doing was right and I need to like fight for this space. And see someone like Ocasio Cortez, who was a bartender until recently. I was a bartender for 6 years through uni, and then like coming out, it was only last year that I stopped. So it was longer than that.
I'd love you to be MP for Bermondsey and Suffolk.
Fucking hate being an MP.
I'd join that campaign against Neil Coyle.
I would deselect myself.
We'd get you those signatures in a second.
Oh God, no. But like, you know, I was a bartender for 7 years, and then it meant that when I was walking into these political spaces that I felt like I didn't deserve to be there, because if I was good enough, then I wouldn't have to be working in a bar anymore. Like, you know, that level of self-doubt is, you know, so deep. And to see her react with such joy, with such elan, and then when, you know, the haters have really been coming for her in the last few days, she has just been batting them away. She's just like Serena on the court, just like bam. And
she's fire. Look at her Twitter and look at the replies section.
I know, it's beautiful. I spent like you know, like my whole bus journey doing that on my way here. It's really beautiful to see. It's really energizing to see, and I think that it encourages a participative model of politics in which you're not waiting for a messianic figure anymore. You're starting to think like, well, actually, all those reasons why I excluded myself from participating in these structures or thinking I could take a leadership role, that's what qualifies me to do it. And the real frauds are the people who don't think they're frauds, like Joe Crowley.
Yeah,
that's great.
I mean, obviously you're right, it's not just structures that allow this to happen, but structures enable it to happen when the mood is there. Which is why we need internal party reform. I wonder if when I whisper that it comes out on the podcast. Anyway, I said this is why we need internal party reform. Let's talk about abolishing Silicon Valley. When are we doing it? How are we doing it? Why are we doing it?
Well, this is something I came up kind of as a joke a week ago, just because I was seeing all this stuff around abolishing ICE, and I was like, I mean, can we just extend the concept of abolition to other things like Silicon Valley? And I think what it does is, like, the whole point is to just imagine a world where Silicon Valley as it is now doesn't exist. And I think there's something really powerful and really new about that, right? Because we kind of take for granted that, you know, 5 of the top 10 companies by market capitalization in the world are going to be these like tech companies, right? Headquartered in the US, mostly in the Bay Area. And it's just one of those things where it just feels so natural, and it's really hard to imagine a world without them. But at the same time, a lot of this stuff happened only in the last few decades, right? And the idea behind abolition as like the framework in which to consider this concept is to realize that a lot of what's wrong with Silicon Valley is structural. It's not that there are a few individuals like Elon Musk, Mark Zuckerberg, Peter Thiel, who are just bad people and need to be replaced by women or people of color, which is, you know, what the like liberal feminist way would
more
be.
Sheryl Sandberg.
Exactly. Like, we don't need to lean into Silicon Valley. We need to get rid of it altogether. And part of the reason is because the whole structures of the industry produce this ecosystem of people who are going to make terrible decisions, right? And who are geared more towards creating shareholder value. And I think what's special about tech is that because technology occupies a really interesting position within capitalism, and we're at a time of low interest rates, especially in the US, and money is just being funneled towards technology and towards venture capital and towards these big tech companies in the hopes that somehow you'll get a return on capital. Technology is just this, you know, this like dream that everybody kind of believes in. It's like, oh, I'll just invest in technology, and then I'll invest in these startups, I'll invest in Kickstarter, whatever, something. I'll invest in Bitcoin, right? And then one day I'll make my money back. And it's one of those things.
Did you do that? I mean, we all wish we did that.
Not Bitcoin. I invested in a different coin, actually.
Oh, really?
But I don't want to talk about that.
Everyone's like desperately trying to find that wallet where they tried to buy some, what was it, Ritalin on the internet in sort of like 2012, and they're like, that £10 I converted in 2012 would be worth like 10k now.
Yeah, which is true, but
I just went to my like friendly neighborhood shotter like a mug. Support local businesses.
And stay poor.
But I mean, just the fact that this is possible, the fact that Bitcoin can reach 15,000 overnight, right? It's just it speaks to this like collective mania about technology in our world today. And I mean, the big problem with Silicon Valley, it's yes, there are problems in the sense that it's not diverse enough. There are problems in the sense that, you know, it's bringing up house prices in the Bay Area for one, right? But I think the problems are not, you don't fix the problem, the core fundamental problem of Silicon Valley by, say, addressing the housing crisis or getting a few more women and minorities. The problem is that technology is being used to increase returns to capital and deepen inequality in a way that's not sustainable, in a way that no one on the left would want, surely, in a way that is making the world a much worse place, contrary to what a lot of people in tech seem to think. And we're starting to see some pushback against that from within these tech companies. So I wrote a piece for Novara last week.
Let's get that up. Can we get up the
really,
piece
really good.
from Novara? Now is the time for worker power in the tech industry.
So I think what's really exciting about this time right now is that we're seeing people in tech realize that even though they're getting paid six-figure salaries, they get a nice air-conditioned bus to go to work every morning. They get free food, beanbags, massages, whatever. They get all these perks. They're realizing that maybe that's not enough. Maybe the perks are actually something's more sinister, right? Something designed to keep them from thinking about the ethical concerns of their job. I mean, a lot of people in tech, they're not trained to think in terms of ethics. I never was. I never took a single social sciences course. I took computer science, math, and biology. That was it. And for some reason, that qualified me to be, a software engineer at a company like Google. And I mean, a lot of people in tech are very similar, or even worse, right? It's a huge problem. It's a structural problem as well, like that these companies take advantage of these people who really like programming for whatever reason, right? And they just give them a lot of money and make them not think about the ethical, the social consequences of what they like to do. And it's a shame because people who like programming, like writing software, they should be able to do that in a way that is beneficial for humanity. Because most of the time, people want to do that on some level. It's just that it's kind of the desire to do so has been a bit beaten out of them because it doesn't really feel like there are any natural outlets in the community they live in, right? For them, their only options are big tech company, slightly smaller tech company, shitty startup that's just about like selling your data to big tech companies, right? It's like the options are so limited. And I feel like there is like all this frustration that is just looking for an outlet. And we're seeing an outlet in the form of the Tech Workers Coalition, which is something I mentioned in the article. And that is just a group of people who are trying to change the way things are in the tech industry. Some of them are, out and out socialists, communists, anarchists, whatever. Some of them aren't as politically engaged, but they're starting to think about what politics could mean to them. And I think that's really exciting. Like I'm seeing people who I used to follow on Twitter who only ever talked about tech suddenly start talking about the ethical concerns of the tech industry.
I mean, so to play devil's advocate here, because I read your article and really, really enjoyed it, is that why should I, as a communist, care or view as a source of revolutionary or radical political change white bourgeois guys wearing short sleeve shirts? And if we do focus our energies on trying to get people to wake up to the compromised ethical conditions in which they exist in their working lives, who do make a lot of money, is this not potentially replicating a kind of Victorian model of philanthropy, where it's like, oh, you've made your money in a bad way and now you're kind of trying to ameliorate the worst effects of it, but it doesn't fundamentally change the exploitative relationship between labour and capital, and it's kind of just lubricating the hinges a bit rather than blowing the bloody door off.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really unfortunate situation we're in, right? Where we almost have to rely on these people. And I think part of the reason why it's important to consider Silicon Valley and the whole tech industry in any sort of left vision is just to realize how crucial of a role Silicon Valley plays in the global ecosystem, right? Just first of all, an economic role, the fact that so much money is being funneled towards this industry in a very weird American imperialist way. If you think about the role that companies like Google, Amazon, Facebook play in controlling so much digital infrastructure, right? The UK government relies on Amazon to provide services through Amazon's web service divisions. We all use Google, we all use Facebook. Even if you don't use a computer, right? If you use any sort of public service that's digitally enabled in any way, it's going to rely on some sort of infrastructure likely provided by one of these big tech companies. And so even if you yourself are, you try to distance yourself from tech, the rest of the world is slowly being kind of infiltrated by these tech companies. They're gaining more and more power, and they're getting to the point where it's going to be hard to stop them via, regular politics as usual means. And that's why I think worker power in the tech industry could be an interesting avenue. And I mean, to tie back to the whole ICE thing. So there was this really interesting thing with ICE where ICE was getting digital services from a lot of these big tech companies, right? Like Microsoft. I think Salesforce probably provided something to either ICE or some other arm of the border control. And you have people at these big tech companies who are really unhappy with what's going on. Like they see these videos of children being detained. They think, wow, this is not my politics. This is not what I support. They realize that their companies are complicit in making this happen, and they're fighting back, right? And so far, it's still unclear what's going to happen. But we had something similar with Google recently, where some software engineers at Google found out about this contract that Google had with the Pentagon, where they were going to provide artificial intelligence to improve drone strikes for the U.S. military. And I mean, not everyone at Google is American. Not everyone cares about maintaining U.S. military dominance. And so that was actually like a great avenue for politicizing people. And that ended up somewhat successful in the fact that Google canceled the contract. So there is a potential for power. I mean, that, of course, is just the tip of the iceberg. You know, the military-industrial complex is huge. And there's so many other ethical issues around tech companies that haven't really been brought up yet. But for me, what's exciting is, like, if you take something that's so obviously horrible, like, you know, the video of children being detained in cages, and you make that some sort of bridge to something bigger, to something broader about realizing that the entire tech industry is founded on something just fundamentally unfair. It's founded on the fact that, you know, technology is being used to increase returns to capital while disempowering labor. And I think the most obvious case of disempowering labor is if you look at the gig economy, you look at Uber, you look at Deliveroo. What is that but just taking advantage of people in precarious living conditions who need jobs and just making them accept the lowest wages they can? And I think a lot of people at these companies don't think about it in that way because they're not paid to, right? And it's like no one has really told them to. And they probably just don't see themselves as like the same as these Uber drivers, as these delivery riders.
The military-industrial complex is quite an interesting comparison, actually, because I suppose what you're saying is there's people in sort of like, it's not, middle management isn't the right word, but sort of like middling status in these companies. So you've got the big venture capitalists at the top, you've got the Uber drivers or the delivery drivers at the bottom, or the people that work in the Amazon warehouse. And then you've got this bunch of tech engineers in the middle who are treated quite well, don't have much reason to complain in terms of sort of like their personal living standards, but could present sort of a spanner in the works and exert some leverage to change the policies of those tech companies for sort of like moral or ideological or ethical grounds. And the reason I say the comparison with the military-industrial complex can be helpful is because if you want to rely on workers who go into the arms industry, or especially the middle management of the arms industry, or the middle management of the army, colonel, like the colonel class or whatever, they went into that knowing what they were doing. So you go into the arms industry knowing what you're doing, and you're not shocked when your labor is used to invade and bomb people from other countries. Whereas now the tech industry is so integral to these practices, to war, to drone strikes, and to detaining immigrants. But the people who went into those jobs had no idea that that's what they would be providing their labor to do. And so that gives us a sort of unique, it's probably not quite unique, but I mean it's an interesting and specific sort of ability and capacity to organize here to affect and disrupt the militaristic practices of the state.
Yeah, exactly. I think a lot of people go into the tech industry because they like writing code, and it's nice when companies give you great job offers, right?
Beanbags, table tennis.
Yeah. Like it's
free coffee.
It's nice. It's like people feel valued, they feel special, and for them, it's like it's a treat to be able to work on something that they love doing, where it's like it's a craft, it's a passion. That's definitely for me. Like that's why I loved being in tech. I just loved what I was building. And going back to your point about this like Victorian, like potentially problematic Victorian model, I think that is definitely a concern, but at the same time, the way you counter that is by emphasizing commonalities, right? By saying that it's not that you're, being paternalistic and just like taking care of the people below you who are just fundamentally inferior. It's showing that we're all on the same side. Tech workers are still workers, right? They might be treated better for now than the people who are serving their meals or cleaning their offices, but fundamentally they have more in common with them in terms of class interest than they do with, Mark Zuckerbergs of the world.
Because what we know is that money doesn't trickle down, precarity trickles up.
Right, no, you guys.
Yeah, so my question is, and I say this as someone who does all their learning about tech from speculative fiction and then trying to teach my mum how to use WhatsApp, is what do you think that a left tech strategy should be? Either at the level of workplace organising or thinking about left startups and left projects and a kind of coherent strategy. Because I think at the moment, like, that energy does exist amongst different pockets of the left, but it's certainly very atomised and dispersed, and there doesn't seem to be a sense of common purpose.
That's a good point. I mean, this is something I still don't really know how to articulate, because it feels like we're at such an early stage in this conversation. It does feel to me like the left has kind of abandoned tech for a while. Like, I mean, I've read some good, like, Marxist critiques of what's going on in the tech world, but it doesn't seem like there's anywhere near enough given the enormity of the problem that we're in now, right? Like, the reason the idea of abolishing Silicon Valley is so important is because it's gone to the point where that it needs to be in some level abolished, right? Like, it's gotten to such a scale that it has fundamentally reshaped how the world works, and we can't just slowly reverse it, right? Because that would take forever. We need to just reimagine the world without it. And I think the left.
But when you say without Silicon Valley,
yeah,
are we still going to have Facebook?
What are we doing with Seattle?
Oh.
What's wrong with Seattle?
Silicon Valley,
Amazon.
not as like the geographic area, right? But just as, these big tech companies that are taking over the world, taking up so much money. I think we have to imagine a world where, say, tech entrepreneurship is conceived in an entirely different lens. Because for me, when I started my company, the whole goal was to sell to another company in a few years' time. Like, the point was just to get acquired by, like, Twitter or Facebook or whatever. We'll put 3 years of our lives into it, and then we'll just come away with a lot of money, and we'll be slightly more famous, and we'll be able to do our next company. And I think that's just, like, a fundamentally stupid way of starting a company. It just doesn't make any sense from, like, a societal perspective. What we need is a model of entrepreneurship where the whole goal is like a more collectivist socialist one, where you want to create a company that's so successful that it becomes some sort of public service. Maybe not like a national service, right? Because the goal...
Or maybe.
Maybe. But like,
post-national service, darling.
Exactly, yeah. Like, the whole point of technology is that it can transcend borders in
in
a really interesting way. So the goal should be to create socially useful products that are then available, ideally at the free the point of use.
Yeah, because we can't nationalize Facebook, can we? Because then, like, it's an international service.
That's a very complicated discussion, unfortunately. But yeah,
do you think that's a different show, isn't it? We'll do a different show on nationalizing
That's what my
Facebook.
dissertation's going to be on.
Oh, is it?
Yeah,
oh,
once
fabulous.
I start writing it.
Oh, great. Well, we will do a show on that.
Yeah.
I mean,
Ash?
I feel like I've learnt loads from this, and I feel that it really has deepened and enriched my own engagement with this stuff, because I think that when you have a left where so many of us have been drawn from arts, humanities, social sciences, that kind of thing, is that, I look at someone who can write code as a kind of occultist, really. Like, I just feel like, you guys are these sorcerers summoning these spirits, which I don't understand and have no control over. But I also know that I'm entirely reliant on in a way which feels worrying and disempowering. So this idea that, that one might apply your political lens and say, hang on, I don't understand technology, but I do understand that this particular political crisis has opened up a space here, or it's like creating these conflicts amongst people, and we should speak to that rather than speaking past it or ignoring it. I feel I've learned a lot from that, so thank you.
I'm going to take a couple of questions from the comments that haven't arrived yet, but I mean, now is your time. So if you have a question, ask them now.
I have a question for everyone.
You've already had loads of questions.
Yeah, no, but are your thighs as clammy as mine? Because I'm just like sticking to the chair.
Abuse your position of being on the show.
I'm just saying, let's all admit to like sticky, clammy legs.
Very clammy.
It's all the sweat just comes out of my forehead. I don't know why. There's something about it. It all gets channeled up there.
I'm just like, it's just like thighs and upper lip. Like, I've got a sweat moustache and then like sweat.
Was this the question?
Hamstrings. Yeah, no, it was just. I just wanted to be like.
How sweaty are you?
In the meantime, should we do a shout out to the World Transformed?
Oh yeah, Wendy, you do the shout out to the World Transformed.
Sure. Okay, so the World Transformed is happening in Liverpool this year, September 22nd to 25th. Most of you probably know about it in some way or the other, but the website just went live today. You can buy tickets.
Wendy built it.
I built the website. That it was designed by other people, but I helped build the website.
You built it.
And you should definitely buy tickets. I think all of us are going to be there.
Yeah,
right?
we're all going to be there. We're Novara discussing putting on a party. We haven't quite decided.
I missed the party last year. I heard about it because I was back in London.
Legendary.
By that point.
It was really good
I missed
fun.
it.
I got drunk with Emily Thornberry in the toilets, which was a life dream unlocked.
While these questions come in, I've got a question, which is that usually in an industry, what happens when there are sections of the workforce that try and unionize, that politicize, that realize they're all socialists, or already were socialists, is that they get victimized by management, and management is not particularly keen to keep them on the payroll. Do you see a movement in Silicon Valley where people at the top of Facebook and Google and Amazon are noticing that sort of like a socialist spirit is spreading amongst their workforce and they want to nip it in the bud?
That's a really great question. So there was a case a few months ago of this company called Lenetics, based in the US, where they actually did fire all of their software engineers who tried to unionize. And they did it by basically outsourcing the jobs to Eastern Europe. And I mean, that was a huge setback for the movement. And it was just terrible. And it was interesting because, I mean, it's going to be interesting to see what the National Labor Review Board says about that, because Trump has been saying we're going to stop companies from outsourcing jobs overseas, and this is what this company did. But at the same time, it was a case of trying to break up this union. But I think that was an isolated case. It was a very small company, and it seems like the software engineers who tried to unionize, they were not considered indispensable enough by management, where management decided to let them go. Whether or not they were indispensable or not is more like that's not really the point. The point is the management didn't see them as indispensable. Whereas what you see in a lot of big tech companies is that because it's so expensive to try to get engineers, it costs a lot of money to recruit.
I mean, they're in real high demand, right? That's why the working conditions, the pay, the buildings is also sort of like attractive. Yeah,
they're valued. They're like their talent that you recruit. It's kind of like like a sports team trying to recruit talent. It's that same sort of dynamics. And as a result, if you had people who for some reason or the other were in really key positions at these companies, who had a lot of internal goodwill and maybe like followings outside the company, it would be a lot harder to try to fire them, and knowing that they're going to cause a public outcry, especially if you had enough people, right, collectively making the same decision. It's not that easy. Like they can be fired, but it depends on the circumstances, and if you build enough collective power, it's a lot harder and it's going to look a lot worse for the company.
So what you're saying is public facing political antagonism and good campaigning.
And also get so good at coding that you can't be replaced, which is difficult. I'll probably never achieve it, but I'll keep doing what I'm doing, and hopefully that'll make a little bit of difference.
I'm really good at like typing and looking productive.
All right, some questions.
Oh, wow.
Some of them are hard. One of them quotes Deleuze, but I know that's your kind of thing now, isn't it? So,
is it about acceleration?
There is no need to fear or hope, but only to look for new weapons, said Deleuze in the postscript on the Societies of Control in 1992.
I've been meaning to read that.
Can the left make labour market algorithms go to war? I don't fucking understand that question. Sometimes you write questions and I think like maybe the guest will understand it, even though I don't. So I ask it anyway. Do you understand that?
I'm not sure what labour market algorithms means in this case.
And do you know what it would mean for them to go to war? We don't know. Sorry, Jay. You're going to have to be clearer there. This is easier to understand. Is a cooperative version of Uber delivery just as exploitative as it doesn't change the labour relationship?
Oof.
Well, I mean, it depends who's part of the cooperative. Sorry, you answer the question.
I mean, it's controversial. I'm a little wary of saying anything too harsh on cooperatives. I'm personally not very excited by the idea of like platform cooperatives, just because I think that it's like it may be a transitional step, but I think in the long term you have to completely just change how these things work, right? Like with Uber itself, like what is the actual solution to Uber? It's not having a cooperative version, it's having better public transit, right? And it's ensuring that you don't have this like polarization of the people who are driving the cars and the people who are taking them, because most of the time there is a stark inequality. It's not like everyone drives the same number of hours as they like take an Uber, right? And what we're seeing with Uber is that you're creating one class of workers who are rich enough to afford taking Ubers everywhere. And then you have people who have to drive these people around because they have no other way of surviving, right? So I don't know if you can separate the fundamental stratification in terms of like wealth and service, this whole like weird like servant class that's being created by these companies. I don't know if you can separate that by creating a co-op model. I mean, maybe a little bit, but then you have to like go deeper than that. I feel like it's not really exciting for me to think about a platform platform co-op. Like,
I mean, I think you've raised a really, really good point, and have coalesced something that I've been kind of struggling to articulate, which is a Silicon Valley model of utopia is one in which we are all increasingly atomized because we no longer have to be in public space to access public services. And I think that's something which, like, that's someone's utopia. There's lots of people's dystopia as well. And I think that was kind of, a nebulous point that I was making. So, you've got questions from our hooks.
Yeah, I mean, I was just going to add, so I suppose the point of why a platform cooperative would be attractive. I mean, obviously you're talking about abolishing the wage relation in society. So you're saying if you've got some people driving Ubers and some people taking them, there's obviously a problem. But I mean, if you've got people doing different jobs, and buying services from one another, because you also have to remember that not everyone that uses Uber is rich. That like lots of people that use Uber make a similar wage.
Some of us are just drunk.
Make similar wage to the Uber driver. And it's a useful service. And actually, lots of Uber drivers. I mean, I think it's better working for Uber than working for a minicab company. I mean, obviously, I'm not here to sort of advertise Uber. I mean, obviously, it would be better if that was a platform cooperative and there was no like wankers in Silicon Valley sort of extracting the 20% surplus value.
Of course,
but what I'm saying is in the here and now where we have a market economy, I think if someone were to create a cooperative Uber platform, it's not revolution, it's not abolishing the wage relation, but it's a start.
Yeah, I mean, I can see a world where you have, for one, much better public transit.
Yeah.
And you have a platform, you have a co-op version of Uber where people are paid much better wages.
But also thinking about tech as a facilitator of public space and collective belonging rather than something which is trying to mitigate the need to have that at all, I think is like a different kind of vision. Yeah. Like there was that tech startup in New York called like Bodega, right? Which was just like they invented the vending machine essentially. I was like,
yeah, I mean, the problem with the whole Silicon Valley mindset is that you see things as inefficiencies without realizing that for some people it's great. And oh god, I don't know if we should talk about Huel right now. But
oh my god,
I think that is a good
Can
example.
we please talk about Huel?
Me and Wendy are team Huel.
So it's like I see the problems with Huel, but at the same time I'm like happy.
Can we explain for some of our viewers who still find joy in the act of eating what Huel is?
Yes.
Okay. What is Huel,
So Huel
Wendy?
is like, I guess it's like the UK version of Soylent. So like in the US, what predated Huel is this thing called Soylent, which sounds creepy.
Soylent Green is made of people.
I know, it sounds really creepy, but the whole point is it's like a meal replacement thing. And someone once described it to me as like Slim Fast, but for tech bros. So it's for people. It's just like a meal replacement thing you drink, and then it doesn't taste that great, but the whole point is that you.
I love
full.
it. Delicious vanilla.
Yeah, it's like, I mean, the
if
point.
You shake it enough, otherwise it's a bit lumpy.
But it's not meant to taste good, right? Like it's meant to like taste just palatable enough that you can drink
Tastes
it.
good enough.
There you go. It's
don't let what's that thing that Wes Streeting kept saying when he came on the show? Don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. That's what I say about
No.
about nutrition.
And this is where I come clattering in, is that I feel that what this is Calvinism. So it is the avoidance of pleasure, it being itself a virtue, and the avoidance of like sensual pleasures in particular. We were talking about this before we went live, and it made me so deeply sad to hear two people whose work I hold in such high regard, and as people I hold you in high regard. That regard has since plummeted. When I hear Michael Walker talking about,
I feel like I'm going to cry, but all the tears are coming out of my forehead.
Like talking about, the kind of, every time you get like this kind of ghost of a flavour sensation, you grow positively tumescent. You're like, oh, maybe this is vanilla, maybe this is a lump. That's sad. Like, that's not flavour. And I think what I said to you is that you lack melanin at the level of the spirit.
I've got a pasty soul.
Good quote,
You've got a pasty soul, but
pasty
you are
soul,
an ethnic
pasty
minority,
food.
and you have no excuse for this.
I think, so for me, it's like, I see what you're saying, and I do agree on some level, but at the same time, I mean, part of the reason I did this startup, I did programming for so long in the first place, is because I'd kind of internalized this idea that I had to work really, really hard just to be better than everybody else, especially in the software world as a woman. you just get shit on so much, right? Like, I didn't have any female like role models when I started, and the ones that I could see who were visible were always getting shit on because they weren't good enough. I think I internalized this idea that I just had to work harder and just to be really, really good so that people wouldn't discredit me. And I guess like kind of filtered into other parts of my life where I'm just like, I just need to be productive all the time, and things that will help me be productive, like drinking Huel, I will do. So I used to eat oatmeal every day, unflavored oatmeal when I was at the peak of my startup, just like a big bowl of like Quaker oats and water, microwave it for a few minutes, and just and it was good for me because I got more work done.
Biryani as revolutionary praxis.
There's different needs, right? So some people, you maybe drink Huel to be more productive than your average person. I feel like I drink it to make up for the fact that, I get tired quite a lot, I sleep quite a lot. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I feel like if I were to eat, to be honest, actually, I do eat all the meals. I have it as a snack. So Lee Penn has said, I tried Huel, it ruined my guts and made me miss food so much. In a way, I enjoy food so much more because of that experience. Never, ever again. It's made from pea protein. Ugh. What I'd say, Lee Penn, is it ruins your stomach the first couple of times. But then after that, your stomach surprisingly gets used to it. Also, I wouldn't drink Huel on an empty stomach. I have it as an afternoon snack, which I find saves you some money, especially if you're in the library. Takes away that sort of lightheadedness you can get when you have had a coffee and no food in the afternoon.
Do you still go to the library?
I haven't been in a few weeks, but I mean, I haven't drunk Huel in a few weeks either.
Correlation is not causation. My friend.
Michael, have a kiwi. I do love a kiwi. Thanks, Jay.
I just, I've been thinking a lot about the act of collective eating and taking the time to do that, and not seeing that as an extra in your life, or like even an extra to political projects, but something that's really central to it. Growing up, my mum and all her friends were all single parents, and so what they'd do is they'd have these parties because they couldn't go out clubbing, right? So they'd have these parties at one particular house in Haringey, and downstairs, so us kids would all be upstairs, and I was always the youngest, so I'd be badgering people to play with me, and they'd be like, no, I'm not playing with Ash, she always cries, and I'd be like, no, play with me, it'll be different this time. And then someone would take it too far and I'd start wailing. They're like, see, this is why we don't play with you. And I will never forget hearing Oxide Neutrinos Bound for the Reload for the first time on like the Son of a Family Friend's decks, and it was like hearing Garage for the first time. I was like, whoa. And downstairs was all these women who were all political activists as well, so all of them involved in feminist, anti-racist campaigning, and a table end to end laden with food. And so my mum would always bring pakoras, biryani, so like South Asian cuisine, and her friends would all bring like Caribbean food, lots of West African food, so there'd be jollof here, there'd be plantain here, there'd be like goat curry, there'd be dumplings, and like at the center, kind of almost like a baptism font, a bowl of rum punch, which like you'd like sneak little bits of like as a kid. And thinking about like the centrality of food there, and thinking about like what they needed in order to survive, because all of them were working mums, all of them in a different way, because they were kind of working in that kind of like, council, like, public sector kind of job thing. But certainly were made to feel that they weren't good enough. They had to work twice as long, in particular, like than their white counterparts, that kind of thing. They had a real sense of precarity. Also, all of them as single parents, they had a sense of like what that precarity would then mean for their families. Was like, no, in order for us to survive and to like live and to grind the way that we do, we have to have this time like once a month. And you'd come down, they'd all be playing like Marvin Gaye, be playing Shalimar, Odyssey, lots of funk, lots of soul. Which is a really long tangent to say, like, Huel makes me sad.
Babe, though, wasn't that was once a month?
It was like once a month.
Yeah, because the point, like, we should still have collective meals, but you don't need 3 a day, do you?
It's like,
loads of the meals you have are boring on your own.
But I'm saying communism will be like those house parties
every day.
All the time.
Well,
every day.
Yeah, maybe, but maybe we'll want to do other stuff. I mean, do you know?
You're not invited to my communist house party.
I think if I had a communal meal every day, maybe I'd get bored of it. I want one maybe every other. The other day I'll have Huel. Be more flexible. Communism's choice is important. I know this has been tainted by Tony Blair and New Labour. The idea that everyone thinks choice is neoliberal now. Choice sometimes it's just nice to be able to choose. We're all different. We're all special.
Protestants are ruining communism. Welcome to my TED talk. Right, this is just Calvinism. This is what I think it is. Is that this is just like the legacy of a Protestant avoidance of pleasure.
Gary's commented to say we are not sponsored by Huel, FYI. But just to clarify, we would be if you offered. So Huel,
I want that Palmer's cocoa butter sponsorship.
get in touch. We want not just free Huel. We want like money.
I would take the sponsorship from Palmer's just for free Palmer's cocoa butter, because I've been telling people on this platform, moisturize twice a day with Palmer's cocoa butter, and you will look like this forever. I'm actually 65 years old.
I'm not. I wonder how many people in the comments do that. We got quite a lot of new viewers.
Are we
about
over time?
20 minutes ago, and I was like, the game must have gone into extra time.
Yeah.
And it had. It was Belgium won on penalties. I'm really sad we missed a penalty shootout. We love penalties. But anyway, we're not going to do a fucking analysis of penalty shootouts now. Let's finish the bloody show.
Can I do a football analysis, please?
Yeah.
'Cause I've been crying out to do one on Novara Media. I want to do a football podcast.
Me and Aaron tried to do one once, and it was kind of embarrassing.
Did you know nothing about football?
I know nothing about football. Like, Aaron talks a little bit about Bournemouth, but I mean, neither of us really understand
Why
much
did
about
you two
football,
try to do it then?
Oh, it was just a discussion at the beginning of the show, you know.
Excluded
Sometimes
the biggest
conversations
lad
don't
in
work.
Novara.
Clearly.
You weren't fucking here. She's been
Thailand,
away
sorry.
for a month.
I've been off on a banter tour, playing football on the beach. It was beautiful.
Gary McQuiggan is anti-Huel. Whatever. We'll get you into it. It's vegan, actually. Jane Pickering loves food. Good for you.
Thank you, Jane.
All right. We are... Oh, it was 3-2 in the night. Oh, it sounds fucking exciting. We'll watch the highlights, even though we now know the result. Final thoughts from everyone. I mean, it's a difficult question, isn't it? Now we've sort of...
How much do you like food?
How much do you like food? Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny how we went from Silicon Valley to just food.
It's all related, you know?
I guess.
Radical critiques.
I'm not saying I dislike food. I think food is great. I think.
Why do you hate food so much? Why do you want to ban food, Wendy?
I have one drink of Huel a day, and it's good for my macros. I put a protein powder in as well.
Yeah. Just in the afternoon? Sort of mid-afternoon?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's sensible. Ash?
You don't get an ass like this eating Huel, all right? This is fried chicken and crisps.
Yeah, but you can have that, like, in the evening.
I'm committed.
All right. Huel wins 2-1. If you want to sponsor us, Huel, please get in touch. My DMs are open.
Same, but for Morley's Chicken Shop.
Oh,
I don't take corporate
I'd love
money.
that. We're South London based, so we could get like a Morley's sponsorship. That'd be great. And
Lions
Wendy
is
doesn't
actually the
take
chicken shop of choice.
corporate money, at least not publicly, which is sensible in the new era where that's how you win elections.
Shall we wrap up, my friend?
We're gonna fucking rack up. Yeah, this was. We're gonna rack up. We need to rack up.
They're like half an hour over.
We are going to end the show. Please, to support a new media for a new politics, go to support.novaramedia.com. Donate what you can afford. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. Encourage your friends, your family, your cousins,
Your lovers.
if
Your
you've got one,
exes.
your exes, if you want to have an awkward conversation. I mean, this could actually sort of break up an awkward conversation. It's a good icebreaker.
Yeah.
Anytime you next feel awkward, ask the person you're talking to, do you support .novaramedia.com?
I think my ex actually subscribes to Novara.
Yes.
Oh, really? Oh, what a hero. Well, not a hero. What an asshole. But thanks for subscribing.
Hope he doesn't watch this.
We are... If you do watch this, please keep subscribing. We are going to go off air. See you next week.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.